Welcome back, everyone, for the second part of our lecture on cell division. Quick review here on the cell cycle. So we just had that in the mitosis lecture, but here just quick review. The majority of the cell's life is spent in interphase. We're starting out in interphase with G1, then we're going into S phase and G2, and just here this was the mitosis slice right there. Take a look down here. How does the cell know whether to move on in the cell cycle or not? It's mostly external factors that play a role here. So, for example, some growth factor that's binding to a cell surface receptor. Then we have usually a whole signal transduction cascade all the way down to the nucleus, telling the nucleus, hey, it's time to move on in the cell cycle, or it's time to divide in general. Most of the cell's life is spent in G0, so most cells, they have this big red stop sign right here, and they're supposed to be spending most of their life and go about their business in G1. And it will take a lot for the cell to leave what it was doing and move on in the cell cycle. Here a little bit on cancer terminology. Something everybody should know, a carcinoma is a cancer that comes from epithelium. Now, epithelium is the covering tissue, and it's exposed to most of the environmental factors, environmental chemicals and whatnot, UV radiation. So most cancers, about 90%, over 90% are carcinomas. Those are cancers that started in epithelium and then started growing from there. Epithelium is relatively fast dividing tissue, so these cancers are, a lot of times, they grow pretty fast. Sarcoma, those are cancers that they started out in connective tissue. So that connective tissue is deeper. It's harder to damage that tissue with factors like UV radiation or chemicals, but nevertheless connective tissue can also turn cancerous, and that's when we call it a sarcoma. Sarcomas are rarer, much rarer. There's less than 10% of all cancers, but they're also harder to treat. They do grow slowly, but again, they're hard to treat a lot of times. Then we have a special type of cancer. It's basically a sarcoma because it comes from connective tissue, but blood is a special type of connective tissue because it's liquid. The ground substance is liquid, and so it has a special name. These cancers that come from blood cells, white blood cells that is, these are called leukemias. So here's pretty simplified kind of diagram what could happen if a cell turns cancerous. So first you have the normal tissue layers, and then there's a cell that starts to divide uncontrollably, and it starts to take up more and more space until it's all filled up here, everything's filled up. And the cancer will not give up, and there's no more space. It says, well, then I'm just going to migrate to new sites. And that's an important term that you should know. That's called metastasis. So metastasis right here, this term right here, that is when this happens. These cells, they break through the basal membrane and then migrate to other locations in the body. Usually they're using lymph fluid, lymphatic vessels to migrate to other places. Let's start out by looking at some skin cancers. Skin cancers are very common. There are 3 different types. We're going to start out here with a basal cell carcinoma. It's the least malignant, most common type of skin cancer. It arises from the stratum basal cells. They proliferate, they turn cancerous, and then invade the dermis and the hypodermis. It's relatively slow growing, does usually not metastasize, and if you have one, then you can just have it cut out, and that will, in most cases, take care of the problem. So here's what a basal cell carcinoma might look like. It's like an area of the skin that's exposed to a lot of UV radiation, like here, the nose area. Looks like a sore that won't heal, just kind of stays open, and it can be easily removed by surgical excision. The squamous cell carcinoma, to move on, is also fairly common. It's arising from keratinocytes of the stratum spinosum, and it's usually also in areas that are exposed to a lot of UV radiation, so sunlight, the scalp, ears, lower lip. And this one, it can grow more rapidly. It does metastasize if it's not removed, but if you take care of it, and most people realize when something's growing on their skin, then you can cut that out. Prognosis is typically good. Here's what a squamous cell carcinoma might look like. This one's pretty big. It's more of a growth type, not a sore so much, but a growth, extra growth. Now here comes the most dangerous form of skin cancer, that's called a melanoma. This one is a cancer that arises from the melanocytes of the skin. So those are the pigmented cells in the skin. This one is by far the most dangerous type of skin cancer because it is highly metastatic and resistant to chemotherapy. There's something called ABCD rule of diagnosing a melanoma. A stands for asymmetry, B stands for border, the border being irregular, the color basically having different shades of color in the same mole type of thing. That would be of concern. And then the diameter being larger than 6 millimeters, so that's the size of a pencil eraser. So let's take a look at this. The ABCD rule, let's apply it to these cancers right here. Let's maybe take the one to the right over here. So A for asymmetry, so this thing doesn't really have a line of symmetry. B for border, the border is definitely irregular. It's kind of more solid right here, and then there's this kind of ragged over here. The color, it's kind of metallic greenish on this side, and then kind of lighter brown on the other side right here on the other area. And how about the diameter? So here over here, that's a centimeter ruler, so this thing is about 2 centimeters in diameter. It's definitely more than 6 millimeters, and so this therefore something like this, if you see this growing, that would be a big concern on your skin. A few words here about statistics. So this chart here shows the estimated cancer cases, or the cancer cases for 2010. And you can see that this particular chart here is split up by gender. For if you are taking into consideration all sites, then lung cancer is still the biggest killer overall. For males, the biggest the highest number of cancer cases is definitely prostate cancer, and for females it's breast cancer, and that has not changed. Overall cancer deaths, all sites, the estimated deaths over here, all sites, so we have 270,000 something for women and a little bit more for men, but you can see it's well over 500,000 for sure. Moving on to more current statistics, you can see not much has changed overall. So this is from last year, 2019, and there we have again the estimated cancer deaths, now 321,000, and for females 285,000. Compare that to 10 years ago, it's about the same, slightly higher. The good news is that there are new cancer therapies out there, and that more people are actually surviving. Overall, lung cancer is still the biggest killer, and then if you split it up by gender, then for men it will be still the highest numbers in prostate cancers, and women breast cancers. Let's take a look at it, sort of a comparison here of incidence and mortality, and these percentages are from 2018. So let's take a look at the incidence. Let's take the first one here, lung cancer. Out of all cancer diagnoses in the year 2018, 11.6% were lung cancer diagnoses. Take a look at the mortality. Out of all the people that died of cancer in the year 2018, it was 18.4% were lung cancer deaths. Now that means that lung cancer is still one of the deadliest forms of cancer. How about breast cancer? Lots of diagnoses. 11.6% of the cancer diagnoses were breast cancer, but it moves down here on the mortality chart. There we have 6.6% of cancer deaths are due to breast cancer. So that's good. That means a lot of progress has been made in helping women survive breast cancer. It's still mostly women that have breast cancer. How about colorectal cancer? There we have 10.2% of all diagnoses and almost the same number in mortality. So there's still, they need to make some more progress and work on that. Prostate cancer, lots of diagnoses, not even on the chart over here. So good news for the guys. There's a lot of new techniques, surgery techniques available. Also, prostate cancer is now diagnosed pretty early on, and there are some good cures available. Stomach cancer, not so much, 5.7% of diagnoses, but 8% of death. That means you get diagnosed with stomach cancer is not so good. Let's take a look at this one right here. The only point I want to make about this slide here is that cigarette consumption has a direct link to lung cancer. I know that the cigarette industry, of course, doesn't want to hear it, and probably the vaping industry doesn't want to hear it either. But here are the facts, and you can see that lung cancer, the rise here follows the cigarette consumption chart very closely. And it's about a 20 to 30 year delay. That means you start smoking today, you're going to have your lung cancer 20 to 30 years later. And the link is very, very strong. Take a look at this one right here. Also, your likelihood of developing lung cancer increases with the amount that you're smoking. It's related to the amount of cigarettes smoked per day, so it goes up. The more you smoke, the higher your risk. Also, the younger you start, the higher your risk, except that apparently if it's slightly better to start under age 15 than above between 15 and 19, but this is not that significant. The point is, the younger you start, the worse it gets. And even if you decided that you're going to quit smoking, then you will never go all the way back down to the lower risk of a non-smoker, but at least you are actually dropping down here on the risk scale. And keep in mind that this is a log scale here on the y-axis. Here's a chart that shows you some cancer trends. A few things to point out here. You see this obvious peak right here. This came from a new diagnostic tool becoming available, so all of a sudden you had a spike in diagnostics. The lung cancer cases have been going down recently because of the campaigns to stop smoking. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with this increase in vaping among teenagers, so we'll see how that plays out in about 20 years or less. And then a lot of cancer is kind of stable. Colorectal cancer has been going down because people know what the risks are and they're trying to avoid the risk factors. Here are some trends in death, cancer death. Depending on whether a new diagnostic tool becomes available, that's when the rate changes usually. So these charts, you can just take a look at them and kind of whatever interests you. There will be no questions on those charts on the exam. It's just sort of for your information. Also here, there's cancer incident split by ethnicities and male, female. So here would be global cancer trends. You can just take a look at this. Whatever interests you. Again, there will be no questions on the quiz on this or on the exam. The global cancer data here from 2018. You can just take a look at also here's incidence versus mortality rate. It's kind of interesting when you're taking a look at different areas of the earth. It's definitely, there are different populations, high and low incidence populations, which has been studied for a while, and most people think that this is due to environmental factors such as diet, your lifestyle choices. Many things contribute to whether or not you're going to develop a certain type of cancer. And then here, some promising new aspects of all of this. the start of clinical studies. There are some really good news on the horizon on new cancer clinical studies that have been launched and are currently underway.